Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I got a question that I'm going to answer because I do go through and slowly work my way down with questions. I'm terrible about it. I've got a good 3 months worth of things to get to, but hey, look on the bright side. It's 3 months worth of videos, so you're not getting rid of me. There's content forever. And yes, Mumbles, I would have you on a stream. That'd be fun. You could just insult me for 2 hours. It would be enjoyable, and then we'd burn it all out, and then you'd have to do 30 days of just compliments. It'd be amazing. No, but the question that I got in mail that I'm answering this one is an interesting one because, well, the question was, what are the questions, what are the things that people ask or say in videos that frustrate you? What are the things that, what's the question people say over and over again? And, for what it's worth, most of the time, I would say 99% of the time, I don't get frustrated with questions. I just feel thankful that people are engaging with the video. Even if they're like, you're stupid, I disagree, I still am thankful that you're engaging. Even if you're Mumbles, I'm still thankful. Enough about him. But you're coming and you're spending your time and you're writing something out. In many cases, you're challenging me with a different point of view. And sometimes you're right and I'm wrong. Definitely that happens a lot. So I'm thankful for that engagement. I mean, there's people who do just kind of basic trolling. The stuff that confuses me is usually when one of the, a YouTuber that has a reasonable following, maybe not a huge following, but a reasonable one, come in and they come into live chats or they just kind of take shots. And I'm always kind of, I don't quite get the game that's being played there because they usually look just kind of foolish. Whereas if the person would just say, hey, would you have me on to talk about comics? I would most likely make room for them and do a stream and give them promotion that way. So I don't know, it's always a little weird when people choose to do it for attention. But, the question specifically was around, what are the questions that I get over and over again that are kind of annoying? And I look at it this way. If I do get annoyed at one of these questions, I think to myself, I'm putting out 3 videos a day. I've answered this like 50 times already, but chances are they haven't heard it. Everybody's a first-time reader. Isn't that what Marvel says? So, you can't get too hard on people. In terms of questions that get answered over and over and over again, I think the one that is exhausting to me because it's a common sense problem. This is an area where I think people believe they've got like a really clever take, and it's not. When I do the sales numbers videos, almost every time somebody comes in and they come up with a kind of genius comment, hey, you're showing units sold to the comic shop, not to the customers. So this isn't real sales. And the answer, and like, haha, and the problem where a lot of this springs from is some people have posted videos or photos from comic shops where you see these thick stacks of comics for various things. Usually they're for titles that, whoever is posting the photos kind of making fun of. I remember when Iceman came out, big thick stacks of Iceman. Some people did that for Infinite Frontier, but not that many. Future State got this treatment a little bit. America Chavez has gotten this, and usually those photos are coming from a place of overships where the comic shop received more titles than they intended, or that stack, if you look at these photos, are almost always from a number 1. And what happens is the comic shop, sometimes there's incentives for them to order that number 1 issue. Sometimes it's a number 1 and number 1s, sell better in theory to customers. And so comic shops tend to order large on them. But, that's where the money is coming from. There isn't a reliable way to know sale through to customers. There isn't. But that's, as I've said before in other videos, that's not the gotcha that I think people think it is. They think it's like, aha, there's stacks of these Marvel and DC comics that are unsold, so really they're failing terribly. Even worse, the numbers aren't great and they're failing even worse than those numbers because these comics aren't selling through to customers. Well, there's one bit of common sense that kind of blows a hole in that, and it is simply that comic shops, they won't continue to overorder. Overordering tends to happen for a very short duration. And it's one of those cases where you have no more than 3 issues. that you could, in theory, over-order from. And comic shops are generally wise to this. So if they order high on a number one issue because they believe it's going to sell through or for whatever reason, and they often do, or if there's an incentive program, meaning they over-order in order to qualify for a variant cover or something else, which is honestly probably the most common scenario, or there's overships, although the overships game is much less than it used to be. They're applying that technique much less frequently than they used to. And very occasionally, the number one comic is returnable, and so comic shops will order big knowing they can return it. So those are all reasons why that may happen. But they usually cut their orders very significantly for issue number 2, and they cut them further for issue number 3. And usually final order cutoff and kind of the timing allows comic shops some flexibility on issue number 3. So let's say they order the first issue of Iceman, and they think, I can sell 50 copies, and they sell 5. Like it's a complete bomb. It's a mess. They may still get stuck with issue number 2. Probably they will. Most comic shops, though, will cut that order. They'll go from 50 copies down to 10, just on principle. They actually, at that point, the mentality kind of shifts to, I want to sell out. Doesn't always mean they do, but it sometimes happens. So they'll do that. But even if they order higher on issue number 2, thinking, hey, Marvel's putting a bunch of marketing and promotion behind this, surely it's going to carry through. Let's say the first issue, you got 50 copies. The second issue, you cut it in half. You went to 25, but that's still too much, right? When issue number 1 came in, you've already placed your order for issue number 2, so it's already too late. Those comics are coming to you. And let's say when you put issue number 1 on the shelves, it sells 5 copies. Uh-oh, now you have 45 extra copies of Iceman. It's bad news. The comic shop knows this is worse news, though, because they ordered 25 copies of number 2. And that means they're going to be plus 20 for issue number 2. So now they're like, I've really got to short the order. So generally speaking, with final order cutoff, you are able to get in there and intercept issue number 3. You're able to lower your order dramatically for number 3, or just put in less of an order. Comic shops often do that. Occasionally, the dates don't work for you, and you're stuck with potentially high orders for number 3. But by issue number 4, you're absolutely resetting that down to 5 copies. Now, how do I know this? Well, comic shops are a very thin margin business, so they're not just going to order 50 copies to have sitting around on the shelf. That's not how the business would work. They would go out of business. And yes, a lot of comic shops have gone out of business. Others have opened up. I think I saw some stats, and we were in a Facebook group kind of running the numbers. In the U.S., I think it's been a little tougher overseas, but in the U.S. anyway, we're still under 15% of comic loss over the last couple of years. That's a good number. It's not a good number, but it's much better than expected, particularly after 2000, where people were expecting to lose about 20% of the shops, and that didn't happen. So magic, that's good. But if comic shops are just ordering extra copies of things they won't sell, well, those comic shops don't stay in business long. And the reality is they don't. You see, and this plays out in the numbers. So every now and then I put up numbers videos, like this happened a lot with Thor, and I don't know why. But the Jane Foster Thor, people really don't want to believe those numbers. They really want to believe that it didn't sell at all. And the first run of Jane Foster's Thor did sell higher than the initial God Killer storyline. It sold more copies. Frankly, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it was a mystery. Who is the new Thor? And there's some, collectability around that. And there's it's going to pay off. That to me that's the biggest reason why it continued to sell. But the answer was not that comic shops just ordered tons of extra copies and they sat on the shelf rotting. And you can go to eBay and you can go to other places and you can see that first run of Jane Foster Thor is not in wide availability. It's relatively scarce. That's just what the numbers show you. That's what the price shows you. Now, you may not like that because you hate this Jane Foster Thor experiment, and that's fine that you hate it. But many comic shops actually looked at that one as the big success of the kind of Marvel experimenting with replacing their legacy characters. Certainly did better than Captain America. Certainly did better than when Miles Morales was brought over after Secret Wars. There's a handful of different cases where Marvel changed up their legacy characters, and many of them did poorly. Bluntly, the sales were not there. Jane Foster Thor was the one that a lot of retailers found was the success story. And again, I don't think this has anything to do with a bunch of fans going, hooray, Thor's a woman now. I think it has mostly to do with the mystery of who is Thor. It's a woman, who can it be? And there's a lot of speculation around that, and people like a good mystery and a surprise, and that's what pays it off. So that's really what you have there. I don't think this is a big mystery, but to answer the original emailer's question, that's probably the one that annoys me the most, is people are coming and going, aha, but those comics aren't being sold to customers, so actually it's much worse. Again, as I've said before, that's not the gotcha that you think it is. It may be fun to say because it's like, somebody figured out what B to B to C means, the distributor publisher to the business, the comic shop, who then resells it to the customer. And they're like, aha, there's a gap between the middle B, the comic shop, and the customer that we're not counting. And that's where all the manipulation's happening. Not really. Most comic shops operate on like I said, the very thin margin. Their goal is to sell through. That's really it. They're not in the business of keeping stacks and stacks of comics. Does it happen? Sure. There are certainly photos. But remember, photos can be slightly misleading. You can take a photo in a shop and it can show a giant stack of something, but you don't have the context for that. Was it an overship? Were those comics there because the comic shop was happy to get extra copies because they'd sold off, some variant covers? Did Art Adams do one of the covers and somebody basically sold it to a whale for $100? Yeah, that's most likely what happened there. The answer that I think a lot of people kind of expect is, look at these unsellable comics at some dumb retailer or some poor retailer that Marvel shoved these unsellable comics on. Look at how terrible it is in the comic shop. 9 times out of 10 you go there and the shop owner knows what they were doing. It's rarely a bad shock for them. There's a reason why there's all those copies there. The bigger question mark is, hey, let's see the pictures that show issue 2, issue 3, issue 4, 5, 6, 7, also in huge stacks on the shelf. That's the more interesting picture over time. But of course, we don't see those pictures. So, it is what it is. None of this, by the way, if you're people listen to this and they're like, no, downvote, the comics are bad. And it's like, look, I mean, sure, if you don't like the comics are bad. Great. The comics are bad does not change the facts of what's going on. If you don't like the comics, that's cool. You don't need to justify your dislike by saying that other people aren't liking them either. Just be comfortable in your dislike. It's cool. You can do it. Anyway, there you go. Answer question. Kind of a weird question, but hey, why not? Let me know your other questions, things you'd like me to answer, and thanks for listening.